It was a busy Friday evening at the Lakeside Bistro, one of those places where soft jazz plays in the background and people come not just for food, but for the feeling of luxury. The air smelled of roasted garlic and fresh herbs, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses blending together. The restaurant lights were warm and golden, making the white tablecloths glow softly. Among the waitstaff, a young woman named Emily was doing her best to keep up with the crowd. She wore the same neat black uniform as everyone else, her hair tied back, her face calm though her feet ached from hours of walking. She moved quickly but gracefully between tables, carrying trays stacked with plates, remembering each guest's order by heart. Emily was the kind of worker every restaurant dreamed of having. Quiet, polite, never complaining, even on the hardest nights. But this particular night would test her more than any before. The door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in, glancing around like he already owned the place. The hostess greeted him with a smile, but he barely nodded. He walked past other guests, his expression sharp, his steps loud enough to draw attention. The man was known to some of the staff. His name was Mr. Donovan, a frequent customer who had a reputation for being difficult. He was wealthy, successful, and very aware of it. He liked being noticed, and he liked reminding others of their place. Emily was the one assigned to his table that night. When she saw his name on her list, she took a slow breath. She remembered how last time, he had sent back his meal 3 times, each time with a new complaint. Still, she straightened her posture, put on her warmest smile, and approached his table with quiet confidence. "Good evening, sir," she said gently. "Welcome back. Can I get you started with something to drink?" He didn't look up from his phone at first. He just lifted a hand slightly like he was shooing away a fly. "Water," he said, his voice clipped. "With lemon. Not too much ice." "Of course," Emily replied. "Right away." She turned and walked to the bar, keeping her expression steady. She had learned long ago not to take people's moods personally. Sometimes guests had bad days. Sometimes they just needed to feel important. Still, something about Mr. Donovan's tone always made her chest tighten a little. When she returned with his water, he finally looked up. His eyes swept over her name tag and then met her face. "You're new, aren't you?" he asked. "Not really, sir," she said with a polite smile. "I've been here almost 2 years." He raised an eyebrow. 2 years? As a waitress?" Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." He gave a small, humorless laugh and shook his head. "You must have a lot of patience." She wasn't sure what to say to that, so she just smiled again and asked if he was ready to order. He waved his hand dismissively and told her to give him a few more minutes. Then he went back to scrolling through his phone. At another table, a group of friends were celebrating a birthday. They laughed loudly, raising glasses of wine, their joy spilling into the room. The sound made Emily smile. She loved moments like that, seeing people happy, even if she was just serving them from the side. When she turned back toward Mr. Donovan's table, she noticed his impatient expression. He tapped his fingers against the tablecloth. "Are you planning to bring the menu anytime soon?" he asked. "Or do I have to fetch it myself?" She blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, picking up a menu from the counter. "I thought you already had one." "Well, I don't," he said sharply. "And I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. It hadn't even been 3, but Emily didn't argue. She simply handed him the menu and apologized again. He snatched it from her hand, muttering under his breath. The couple at the next table exchanged glances but stayed quiet. As Emily walked away, her coworker whispered, "You got the tough one tonight." She just gave a small laugh. "It's okay. I'll manage." That was Emily, never bitter, never rude. She had learned to keep her emotions tucked away. Life hadn't been easy. She had once dreamed of becoming a pianist, had even studied music at a small college for a while. But when her mother got sick, she dropped out to help pay for medical bills. She found this job at the bistro, promising herself it would be temporary. That was 2 years ago. Still, she carried her dreams quietly inside her, like a small flame that never went out. About 20 minutes later, the kitchen sent out Mr. Donovan's meal, a grilled salmon dish with steamed vegetables and truffle sauce. Emily checked that everything looked perfect, then carried it carefully to his table. "Here you are." "Sir," she said softly, setting the plate down. He picked up his fork, examined the food closely, and frowned. "This isn't medium," he said. "I'm sorry." "The salmon," he repeated. "It's overcooked." Emily glanced at the dish. It looked fine, perfectly seared with a pink center. Still, she said, I can ask the chef to prepare another one if you'd like. He sighed loudly, leaning back in his chair. Do you people ever get anything right? The words were sharp, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she kept her tone even. I'll fix it for you right away, she said, picking up the plate. He stopped her before she could walk away. No, just leave it. I'm already losing my appetite. The humiliation stung, but she nodded quietly and stepped back. He began to complain again, about the music being too soft, the lighting too dim, the staff too slow. His words were aimed not just at Emily, but at anyone who could hear him. People started looking their way. Some frowned, others whispered. Emily tried to remain invisible, her heart pounding as she wiped a nearby table to look busy. The room felt heavier, the cheerful atmosphere replaced by a strange tension. After a while, Mr. Donovan motioned for her again. She approached, forcing a small smile. Sir, can I? He interrupted. You know what this place needs? Real entertainment. Not this lazy background track. Emily followed his gaze to the corner of the restaurant where an old upright piano sat unused. Sometimes on weekends, a local musician came to play soft music during dinner hours, but tonight it sat silent. He looked at her with a smug grin. You, he said suddenly, you look like someone who could play. Why don't you? She froze, unsure if he was serious. Me, sir? Yes, you, he said. It would be nice to see if you're better at music than at serving food. A few guests gasped softly. Even the manager who was walking by stopped in surprise. Emily's heart began to race. She hadn't played in years, not in public, not since she left school. Her hands felt cold, her mind spinning between embarrassment and disbelief. Was he mocking her? Sir, I don't think that's appropriate, she said quietly. Oh, come now, he replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Surely you can manage a little tune. Or is that too complicated for you? The restaurant had gone silent again. All eyes were on Emily. She could feel the weight of every stare, the heat rising in her face. The manager took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Emily lifted a hand slightly, signaling that it was okay. Inside, she felt torn apart. Part of her wanted to run to the kitchen and hide, but another part of her, deep, quiet, and tired of being humiliated, wanted to stand tall. She didn't know yet what she would do. Mr. Donovan leaned back, clearly enjoying the attention. That's what I thought, he said with a cold smirk. All talk, no talent, Emily didn't reply. She just looked at the piano, her thoughts swirling. That piano was old, its wooden frame scratched, a few keys chipped. But it reminded her of the one in her childhood home, the one she used to play every evening after school. She remembered her mother's soft voice saying, You make the house feel alive when you play. For a moment, that memory filled her chest with warmth and courage. She turned back toward Mr. Donovan and said quietly, If you insist, sir. The smirk faded slightly from his face. Surprised by her calm tone, the other diners exchanged curious looks. Emily walked slowly to the corner of the restaurant. The sound of her shoes against the wooden floor echoed softly in the silence. She sat down at the piano bench, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The restaurant, once noisy and bright, now felt like a stage. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the doors. The soft hum of the lights, the faint sound of the wind outside, everything felt still. Emily took a deep breath, her heart thudding hard in her chest. She lifted her hands toward the keys, her fingers trembling slightly. It had been so long. She didn't even know if she could still play well. But at that moment, she wasn't thinking about perfection. She just wanted to feel something again, to show that behind the apron and polite smile, there was more to her than anyone saw. And as her fingertips brushed the piano keys for the first time in years, a single soft note rang out across the room. Everyone froze. The story that would soon leave the entire restaurant speechless had just begun. The soft note that came from the piano hung in the air for a moment. Trembling like a secret, everyone in the restaurant stopped what they were doing. The servers froze with trays in their hands. The diners paused mid-sentence, and even the kitchen went silent. No one knew what was about to happen, but something about that single sound caught everyone's attention. The woman sitting at the piano took a slow breath. Her hands hovered over the keys, unsure at first. It had been so long since she had played in front of anyone. Her fingers remembered the feeling, but her heart was full of doubt. What if she had forgotten? What if she embarrassed herself even more? She glanced briefly toward the man who had mocked her. He was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. It was clear he expected her to fail, maybe even wanted it. That small expression was all she needed to feel the fire rise in her chest. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about serving tables or staying polite. She was thinking about her mother, the music she once loved, and the version of herself she had buried beneath years of hard work and exhaustion. Then, quietly, she began to play. At first, the music was soft and hesitant, the kind that makes people lean in just to catch every note. Her fingers moved slowly, feeling their way across the keys, searching for old memories. But as the sound filled the room, something began to change. Her hands grew steadier, her shoulders relaxed, and the melody began to flow. The notes came together like a voice she hadn't heard in years, warm, emotional, alive. The guests listened in silence. Even the waiters stood still. The song was unfamiliar, but it carried something that everyone understood: sadness, hope, and quiet strength. Her music told a story without words. It spoke of long nights, of holding on when things seemed impossible, of dreams that refused to die. Each note carried a piece of her heart. The man who had mocked her at first still wore a smirk, but it was fading. His eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. He hadn't expected this. He had thought it would be a clumsy attempt, something to laugh at. Instead, the music began to draw him in against his will. He glanced around and noticed that no one else was moving either. The entire restaurant had become a silent audience. The melody grew stronger. The woman's fingers danced across the piano keys with confidence now. It was as if years of silence had built up behind her, waiting for this exact moment to be released. Every note came out sharp and clear, echoing through the room, filling the corners with warmth and light. The sound bounced off the walls and drifted toward the ceiling like smoke rising from a candle flame. Someone near the bar whispered softly, "She's amazing." Another guest nodded, unable to take their eyes off her. The woman at the piano didn't notice. She was lost in her own world, her eyes half closed, her face calm and focused. She remembered the small music room she used to practice in during college, the sound of her mother clapping after every song, even the ones she got wrong. Those memories filled her chest with both pain and comfort. The music became more emotional, almost like she was speaking to someone far away. The song changed pace. It became faster, louder, stronger, like a storm breaking open. Her fingers moved quickly, almost flying, hitting each note with precision. The emotion behind it was raw. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. People felt it. You could see it in their faces, the way their eyes softened, the way their expressions changed. Even the servers standing in the back forgot they were at work. When the last notes began to fade, the restaurant was completely still. No one clapped right away. They just sat there stunned, as if they needed time to understand what had just happened. Then slowly, someone started to applaud. Another joined in. Soon the entire room filled with the sound of clapping, cheers, and even a few whistles. The woman at the piano lowered her hands and looked around, startled by the reaction. She had played from her heart, expecting nothing. Certainly not this. Her co-workers smiled proudly from the sidelines. One of the cooks peered out from the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a towel. Even the hostess near the entrance had tears in her eyes. It wasn't just the music, it was the emotion behind it. Everyone could feel that what they had just witnessed came from something real, something deep. And then there was Mr. Donovan. He sat still in his chair, his arms no longer crossed, his expression unreadable.
He didn't clap right away.
For a few seconds, he just looked at her as if he wasn't sure what to make of what he had just seen. The arrogance that usually filled his face was gone. Something softer had taken its place, though he didn't speak or move. His wine glass sat untouched. The woman stood up slowly from the piano bench, her hands trembling a little. She gave a small, shy nod toward the room. Her cheeks were flushed, but she looked calm. For the first time all evening, she didn't feel invisible. People were smiling at her, not as a waitress, but as someone who had touched their hearts. The manager approached quietly, his face filled with pride. "That was incredible," he said softly, not wanting to disturb the moment. She smiled at him, a little embarrassed. "I haven't played in a long time," she said. "I didn't even know I could still do that." He shook his head. You didn't just play, he said. You reminded everyone what real emotion sounds like. As she returned to her duties, several guests stopped her just to thank her, to say how beautiful her music was. A couple told her they felt chills listening to her. Someone asked if she had a recording. Another asked if she performed anywhere else. She smiled politely each time, saying no, that she just played for herself sometimes. Inside, she was still trying to process what had just happened. At one table near the window, an older woman took her hand as she passed and said, "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Don't ever stop playing." Her throat tightened. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Meanwhile, Mr. Donovan finally stood up. He walked slowly toward the piano, running his hand along its edge. His expression had softened, but his eyes seemed distant, thoughtful. Then he turned and looked toward the woman who was now refilling water glasses nearby. "Impressive, he said, his tone quieter than before. "Didn't expect that." She paused, unsure what to say. There was no sarcasm in his voice now, but it still made her uneasy. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. He nodded once, almost to himself. "You've got talent," he said. "You should do something with it." She smiled faintly but didn't respond. She didn't trust his sudden kindness. After all, this was the same man who had humiliated her less than an hour ago. Still, she could tell his tone had changed. Something in him had shifted, even if he didn't want to admit it. When he finally left the restaurant, he didn't make a scene. He simply placed a large tip on the table, more than she had ever received from him before, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him and the soft jazz music returned. But the atmosphere in the restaurant was different now. Lighter, warmer. It felt as though everyone had just shared something special. In the kitchen, the other staff members gathered around her, smiling and whispering. "You never told us you could play like that," one of them said. She laughed softly, still blushing. "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "It's just something I used to do." "Well, you just turned this place into a concert hall," another joked. Even the head chef, usually too busy to notice anything outside the kitchen, stepped out and gave her a nod of approval. "That was something else," he said simply. "Reminded me of home." As the night went on, things slowly returned to normal, but the feeling in the air lingered. Guests left with smiles, still talking about the performance. A few even recorded small clips of it on their phones. She didn't know it yet, but one of those clips would soon spread far beyond the restaurant's walls. When the last table was cleared and the chairs were stacked, she sat back at the piano for a moment. The restaurant was empty now except for the quiet hum of the lights. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, not playing, just feeling them. A small smile formed on her face. She thought about how strange the night had been, how it started with humiliation and ended with applause. Life, she realized, had a funny way of turning pain into something beautiful when you least expected it. She closed the piano lid gently and whispered, "Thanks, Mom," before heading home. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed from a nearby bar. She walked slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years. Maybe she wasn't just a waitress after all. Maybe she still had something left to share with the world. She didn't know it yet. But this night, this single moment was only the beginning of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. The next morning started like any other. The sun peeked through the thin curtains, painting soft lines of gold across the small apartment. The woman woke up slowly, stretching her tired arms after a long night at work. Her hands still felt a little sore, not from carrying trays but from playing the piano. She smiled faintly as she remembered the music, the applause, and the faces of the people who had been moved by her performance. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the street below. The city was already awake. Buses passing, people walking to work, children running to school with their backpacks bouncing behind them. It was the same routine she saw every day, but this morning everything seemed just a little brighter. Still, she didn't think much about what had happened the night before. To her, it was just a small moment of courage, something she did to stand up for herself. She had no idea that the moment had already started spreading far beyond the restaurant. At the same time, across town, a young couple who had been dining at the restaurant were sitting at their kitchen table, looking at a short video on a phone. It was a clip of her playing the piano. The sound was clear, her music soft but full of emotion. The caption read, "Waitress plays piano after rude guest mocks her and leaves everyone speechless." The woman who posted it hadn't expected much. She just wanted to share something beautiful she witnessed. But within hours, people began sharing it again and again. Comments poured in, thousands of them. Some people wrote that her music brought them to tears. Others said they could feel her emotion even through the screen. Some called it the most touching thing they had seen all year. By noon, the video had been shared across social media platforms. People didn't know her name, but they called her the piano waitress. Some wrote articles about her, describing her courage and talent. Even local news channels picked up the story, showing the short clip on evening broadcasts. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, things were starting to feel different. When she arrived for her shift that evening, her co-workers greeted her with wide smiles. "Have you checked your phone?" one of them asked. She looked confused. "No, why?" The other waitress grinned and held up her own phone, showing her the video. "You're famous," she said with excitement. "Look, it's everywhere." The woman blinked, not believing what she was seeing. There she was, sitting at the piano playing the same song she had played just for herself. The video had millions of views, and people from all over the world were leaving comments. Her first reaction wasn't pride, it was shock. "Oh no," she said softly. "I didn't mean for people to film it." But as she scrolled through some of the comments, she couldn't help but smile. There was so much kindness there. People were touched by her story, even though they didn't know her full name or her background. "You gave me goosebumps," one comment said. "Thank you for reminding me that talent doesn't care about status," another wrote. "My mom was a waitress who loved music too. This made me cry." The restaurant manager came out of the kitchen smiling broadly. "You've brought us a lot of attention," he said. "We've had people calling all day asking if the piano waitress still works here." She laughed nervously, embarrassed by all the attention. "I didn't plan any of this," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's what makes it special." Throughout the night, customers came in, many of them hoping to see her play again. Some even asked politely if she would play another song. She didn't want to turn the restaurant into a show. But when things slowed down near closing time, she sat down at the piano again. This time she played something gentle and peaceful, a soft tune she remembered from her childhood. Once again, the whole room went quiet. After she finished, people applauded warmly, and a few even thanked her personally. It wasn't like before. No one was mocking her this time. No one looked down on her. They saw her for who she truly was, a person with a gift and a heart behind it. As the week went on, things kept growing. Reporters reached out to the restaurant asking for interviews. She was invited to speak on local TV shows, but she turned most of them down. She didn't like the idea of being treated like a story or a headline. She was just doing her job the same as before. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, a man in a gray coat walked in. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place him right away. He stood near the piano for a moment before approaching her table. When she saw his face clearly, her breath caught. It was Mr. Donovan. He looked different from the last time she saw him. His usual arrogance was gone. His expression was calm, almost humble. He waited for her to finish serving a nearby table before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. She hesitated, surprised to hear those words from him. "You already said that night it was fine," she replied softly. "No," he said. "It wasn't fine. I was rude to you. I treated you like you were beneath me and you didn't deserve that. Then you showed everyone, including me, how wrong I was." There was a pause. The sounds of the restaurant carried softly around them, dishes clinking, soft music playing. She studied his face, wondering if he really meant it. This time his eyes looked sincere. "I used to love music," he said after a moment. "My wife played the piano. She passed away a few years ago. When you started playing that night, I don't know, it reminded me of her. It caught me off guard and I didn't know how to react." Her heart softened a little. She hadn't expected to hear something so personal from him. For a moment she saw him not as the rude man who mocked her, but as a person carrying his own pain. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said gently. He nodded. "Thank you. I just wanted you to know I respect what you did. You have real talent. If there's ever a way I can help you, whether it's lessons, connections, whatever, I'd like to." She smiled faintly, touched but cautious. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I think I just want to keep playing for the joy of it." He nodded again, accepting her answer. Then he placed an envelope on the table. "At least let me do this," he said. "It's not charity. Think of it as a thank you, for the reminder that people are more than what they seem." Before she could protest, he walked away, leaving the envelope behind. Inside, she later found a handwritten note and a small donation to a local music foundation made in her name. She felt tears prick her eyes. The gesture wasn't about money, it was about respect, and that meant more than anything else. As the days turned into weeks, the world slowly moved on to new stories. But for her, something inside had changed permanently. She began saving a little money each month to take music lessons again, not to chase fame, but to reconnect with the part of herself she had almost lost. On her days off, she went to the park and played on an old public piano that stood near the fountain. People would stop to listen, just like they did that night in the restaurant. One afternoon, a little girl came up to her and asked, "How did you learn to play like that?" She smiled, looking down at the bright, curious face. "Lots of practice," she said softly, "and a little bit of heart." The girl grinned and said, "I want to play like you someday." That moment made her heart swell. She realized her music wasn't just about expressing herself, it was about giving something to others. Maybe her story could inspire someone else to believe in their hidden talent, or to stand up when they're looked down on. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she thought about everything that had happened. A single act of humiliation had turned into something beautiful. What started as a cruel challenge had brought her back to her passion, had shown her that even in the hardest moments there's always a chance to rediscover who you are. She wasn't famous in her own eyes. She didn't think of herself as special. She was just a person who refused to let someone's cruelty define her. And somehow that simple truth had reached millions of hearts. At home, she sat at her small second-hand keyboard, the one she had bought years ago but barely used. She turned it on and began to play softly, the notes flowing like a quiet conversation between her and the world. The sound filled her tiny apartment with warmth. This time she didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. The music itself was enough. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like tiny stars, and somewhere deep inside her heart, the same gentle light began to glow, a reminder that kindness, courage, and authenticity never go unnoticed, no matter how small the stage. The weeks passed quietly, though nothing really felt the same anymore. The restaurant went back to its usual rhythm. Busy nights, laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, but the atmosphere had changed. People still talked about the night the waitress played the piano. Sometimes new customers came in just to ask if she still worked there. Some even requested songs, smiling politely, hoping to hear her play again. She didn't mind it. In fact, she felt grateful. Life hadn't suddenly become easy, but there was a lightness inside her now, a quiet happiness she hadn't felt in years. She still worked long hours, still cleaned tables, still counted her tips carefully at the end of each shift. But now when she looked at the piano in the corner, it didn't feel like a decoration anymore. It felt like a friend waiting patiently for her. One slow afternoon, the manager approached her. "Hey," he said with a smile, "you might want to check your email. Someone's trying to reach you." She frowned slightly. "Who?" He shrugged. "Some music company or organization. They sent it to the restaurant's inbox. I forwarded it to you." When she checked later, her eyes widened. The email was from a local music foundation that had seen her story online. They were organizing a charity concert to raise funds for young artists and wanted her to perform as one of the featured pianists. She read the message 3 times just to make sure it was real. Her first instinct was to say no. She wasn't a professional anymore, and she hadn't performed on a real stage in years. What if she made a mistake? What if people thought she didn't belong there? The thought of it made her stomach twist. But then she remembered how it felt to play that night at the restaurant, how free she had felt, how everything else had faded away. Maybe this was her chance to feel that again. That evening, she told her manager about it. He broke into a big grin. "You have to do it," he said firmly. "You've got something special. Don't let fear take it from you." She smiled nervously. "What if I'm not good enough?" He shook his head. "You already proved you are." For the next few weeks, she practiced every day. After her shifts ended and the restaurant lights were turned off, she would sit alone at the piano and play quietly, letting the sound fill the empty room. Sometimes the cleaning staff stayed a little longer just to listen. They never said much, just smiled and nodded when she finished. The more she practiced, the more her confidence grew. She started writing small pieces of her own, bits of melodies that came to her during long walks home or while washing dishes. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. Every note carried a piece of her journey, the struggle, the patience, and the quiet determination that had kept her going. The night of the charity concert arrived sooner than she expected. The event was held in a small theater downtown, decorated with warm lights and elegant curtains. When she stepped inside, her heart started pounding. People were already filling the seats, their excited chatter echoing softly. Other performers were setting up their instruments. Violinists, singers, a small band. Everyone looked confident, experienced. She felt out of place in her simple dress and worn-out shoes. She was backstage when the event organizer came over with a friendly smile. "You must be the one from the restaurant video," he said. "We're so glad you could make it." She nodded nervously. "Thank you for inviting me." He handed her the schedule. "You'll be performing third. Don't worry, just do what you do best. The audience will love you." When it was almost her turn, she peeked through the curtain. The crowd looked huge to her. She spotted a few familiar faces from the restaurant sitting in the audience, smiling and waving when they saw her. Even her manager had come, standing proudly near the back. Seeing them made her breathe a little easier. Finally, her name was called. The host introduced her as a talented pianist whose unexpected performance captured hearts around the world. As she walked onto the stage, the audience applauded kindly. She sat down at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the keys. The bright lights made her eyes water for a moment. But when she took a deep breath, everything around her faded again, just like before. She began to play. The first notes were gentle, flowing like ripples across a still lake. The melody was her own, a piece she had written quietly in her apartment late at night. It wasn't flashy or complicated. It was simple, full of emotion, like a whisper telling a story of hope after hardship. The audience fell silent. You could hear the soft creak of a chair, the faint rustle of someone shifting their coat, but mostly there was only her music. Her fingers moved gracefully, confidently, each note landing exactly where it should. She played from her heart, not trying to impress anyone, just expressing what she felt. As she played, her mind wandered through her memories, the long shifts, the tired nights, her mother's soft laughter, the kindness of strangers, and even the cruelty that had pushed her to play again. Every part of her story was in those notes, and the people listening could feel it. When the final chord faded, the theater stayed quiet for a few seconds, almost as if everyone wanted to hold on to the sound a little longer. Then the applause came, loud, heartfelt, rising like a wave. She stood up slowly and bowed, her eyes shining with tears. For the first time, she didn't feel nervous. She felt at peace. After the concert, several people came to congratulate her. Some were musicians who admired her tone and emotion. Others were ordinary listeners who just wanted to say how much her music touched them. A woman in the front row even hugged her, saying, "Your music made me feel something I haven't felt in years." "Thank you." She smiled through happy tears. "Thank you for listening," she replied softly. Later that evening, when the crowd had gone and the theater was nearly empty, she sat back down at the piano for a moment. The stage lights were dim now, the air quiet and still. She ran her fingers gently across the keys and whispered, "I did it, Mom." She smiled to herself, thinking of how proud her mother would have been. In the following days, more people reached out. A local radio station invited her to play live on air. A small art center offered her a part-time spot teaching children the basics of piano. She didn't know if she was ready to teach, but the idea made her happy. She loved the thought of helping kids discover music the same way she once did. Despite all these new opportunities, she stayed humble. She still worked at the restaurant a few days a week. She said she liked the routine, the people, the sense of normal life. The manager teased her, saying she was probably the only person on the internet famous enough to fill a theater, but still showed up to clear tables. "I guess fame doesn't pay rent," she joked, laughing. He grinned. "Maybe not, but it sure makes the place livelier." Sometimes customers still asked her to play, and she always said yes when the night was quiet enough. The piano had become part of the restaurant's charm now. People came not just for food, but for a bit of music that made them feel something real. One night, after a long shift, she sat at the piano and began to play a soft lullaby. The lights were dim and only a few guests remained. A little boy sat near the front with his parents, his chin resting on the table, listening with wide eyes. When she finished, he clapped his small hands and shouted, "Play again." She laughed softly and nodded. "All right, one more." She played something cheerful this time, light and happy. The boy clapped again, smiling from ear to ear. Watching him reminded her of herself when she was young, full of dreams, full of wonder. When the family left, the boy turned back and waved. "You're the best piano player ever," he said. Her heart warmed. "Thank you," she replied softly, smiling as they walked out. As she closed the restaurant that night, she thought about how life had changed. Not in a big, flashy way, but in small, meaningful ones. People saw her differently now, but more importantly, she saw herself differently too. She wasn't just someone who served food. She was someone who could move hearts, and that realization gave her strength. Before leaving, she turned off the last light and looked once more at the piano in the corner. She reached out and touched it gently, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. "Thank you," she whispered. The piano had given her more than she ever expected. It had brought her back to herself. As she stepped outside, the night air felt cool and clean. The moon hung bright above the lake, reflecting softly on the water. She took a deep breath and smiled. Life wasn't perfect, and she didn't know what the future would hold. But she knew one thing for sure. She would keep playing. No matter where she went, no matter what she faced, she would keep sharing her music with anyone who needed to hear it. And somewhere, maybe in another quiet restaurant, another tired person would find their own courage, just like she did that night when the world stopped to listen. Months passed, and the world around her seemed to move a little faster now. The story of the waitress who silenced a room with her piano playing had traveled far beyond the small town. News outlets wrote about her. People shared her videos online, and every now and then someone would recognize her while she was out shopping or walking by the lake. It still surprised her. She wasn't used to attention. To her, she was still the same person who folded napkins, checked coffee cups, and counted tips at the end of the night. The only difference now was that her music had found its way into other people's hearts. One evening, as she finished her shift at the restaurant, the manager handed her a letter. "This came in for you," he said, smiling. "Looks important." The envelope was simple, just her name written in neat handwriting. She opened it carefully and found a short note inside. It was from a man who said he had been in the restaurant the night she played the piano. He didn't give his full name, just an initial, but his words were sincere. He said her music had reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago: kindness, humility, and the beauty of letting go of pride. He wanted to thank her for that. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "If you ever perform again, I'll be there, quietly cheering from the crowd." She read the note twice and smiled. She knew who it was from. The once snobbish guest who had humiliated her that night, now writing to express gratitude instead of arrogance. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. There was no anger left in her heart, only peace. Life had come full circle in a way she hadn't expected. The next morning, she walked to the park with her old notebook, the one she used to write little pieces of music in. It was a sunny day, with a cool breeze brushing through the trees. Children were playing nearby, couples were walking hand in hand, and a street performer was strumming a guitar near the fountain. She sat on a bench, closed her eyes, and listened. The sounds of laughter, water, and music blended into something gentle and calming. That moment inspired her. She began writing a new melody, one that felt like a conversation between joy and memory. It was simple, like all her songs, but full of feeling. She titled it The Waitress's Song. Over the next few weeks, she began performing at small community events, fundraisers, art fairs, even hospitals. She didn't charge anything. She just wanted to share music with people who needed it. Sometimes she played for elderly patients who couldn't leave their rooms, and other times for children learning instruments for the first time. Every note she played came from the same place, a heart that had learned to heal. One day, after a performance at a children's center, a young girl approached her shyly. The girl was holding a small keyboard, clearly worn out from use. "I saw your video," the girl said softly. "I want to play like you one day."